as your consultants have told you time and time again, they admit you're an empty vessel. And I actually don't think you're an empty vessel. I think you're a Republican.
You left the city during a very difficult time. You can't run from the city, Andrew, if you want to run the city.
Eric, we all know that you've been investigated for corruption everywhere you've gone. City, state, even Barack Obama's Department of Justice investigated you. You've achieved the rare trifecta of corruption investigations. That's why so many people on the stage don't want you to be mayor.
So many people on the stage, I guess they want you to be mayor? What am I missing here? Andrew,
I think you're both right. You both shouldn't be mayor.
Wow. I thought.
Welcome to New York.
I thought the Democratic presidential debates were tough.
That was like
New York, Rev.
Man, oh man.
That's a different. It's tough.
New York politics is back. You could see that last night. It was a knockout. But at the end of the day, though, I think they should be careful because they've got to prove who can bring New York in this post-pandemic era back to some level of where we can get to what was called normalcy.
Yeah.
And I think that they did an old-fashioned debate last night, but we're in a different time. People want to hear who can really bring us back.
Yeah. All
Okay,
right.
New York City mayoral candidate Andrew Yang fended off attacks from his opponents in last night's Democratic primary debate. One recent poll shows the race has tightened significantly ahead of the June 22nd election. And Andrew Yang joins us now. As you see, Reverend Al Sharpton and Susan Del Percio and Mike Barnicle all back at the table as well.
And by the way, you look at those numbers, and let me just ask that candidate, Andrew. You look at those numbers from the WPIX poll and other polls. I mean, great. They're great indicator of what the first choice is. But man, it's ranked voting this year. How are you strategizing for this very new approach to electing a mayor in New York?
I agree with the Reverend. We have to bring people together, and ranked choice voting rewards candidates who have broad appeal. A lot of people have second or third choices. And our numbers show that we have a ton of momentum going into the home stretch. Early voting starts on June 12th. And so we feel very, very confident going into this home stretch.
So the knock last night was you're not ready to be mayor of New York City. What do your opponents have wrong?
You all live in New York City, and you know that we need change. Wherever I go in New York, people say it's not been working. We've been run into the ground progressively over this last number of years. And a lot of the candidates on the stage last night have been part of a city government that has failed far too many New Yorkers for far too long. So this is what I hear everywhere I go. We need to turn the page. We need a fresh start. We need new leadership. We need new ideas.
Andrew, it's Willie Geist. Thanks for coming on the show this morning. You had a big lead about 2 months ago in March. You were up at 32% in this WPIX poll. That's been cut in half now as we go into May. What is your campaign's assessment of why that erosion has taken place?
Well, our numbers show something different, Willie, and the only poll anyone should care about at this point is the early vote on June 12th, June 13th, June 14th, and the primary on June 22nd. That's where our attention is on getting out the vote. And we feel tremendously positive and confident about people coming out and voting in droves because they know that it has not been working, and we need a different form of leadership than we've been getting over the last number of years.
As you know, crime and quality of life are the #1 issue for most voters. If you look at polling, you said last night during the debate, we need to staff up in the precincts and in the gun violence suppression division. You're suggesting we need more cops, not fewer cops. Could you lay out that idea, because that'll be controversial in some circles?
The conversation around this has to become more nuanced and detailed, Willie. The fact is that we don't have enough detectives following up on shootings, which is one reason why the solve rate for shootings in Brooklyn is below 25%. These detectives are staffed on a shooting, and then unfortunately another shooting happens 2 days later, and then another one 2 days after that, and then the first shooting never gets solved. So we need to increase the number of detectives, both in the precincts and in the gun violence suppression division. And we need to go on a recruitment drive, because the reality is thousands of police officers have filed their retirement papers. And so we should be trying to recruit the 21st century police force that reflects the incredible diversity of our city. And so if you're a New Yorker watching this and you want to help make your community safer, apply to the NYPD because we need you. But we're going to need people actually solving the problems on the ground. It is unacceptable that 3 out of 4 shootings in Brooklyn have gone unsolved for the last number of months.
And you know, it's so fascinating, Mika. You look at the WPIX poll, crime is at the top of the list of what voters are most concerned about. Housing second. Police reform down at 10%. But crime is on everybody's mind in New York City. And this is a Democratic primary.
Right, and a lot of the candidates have multifaceted approaches to crime. Susan Del Percio, I know you have a question for the candidate. But first, explain the rank system for those who don't understand how it works.
So this is the first time we're going to see in New York City mayoral primary ranked choice voting, which basically gives you 5 choices. You rank the people in order. So if you want Andrew Yang, you mark him first, and so Catherine Garcia down the road. Then they drop out the people who didn't make the top 5, and they reapportion their votes into 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5.
Oh,
and it's
what a nightmare.
Wait, and by the way, because a lot of what happened with the last presidential, they're not using computers. The algorithms are not being used. So this is all going to be done with ballots literally being put in baskets in a warehouse. And you know the first count isn't going to cut it. So they'll have to do a recount.
That's a nightmare.
So it is a nightmare. Some people are big fans of ranked choice voting because it gives people, a chance. Like, if, the number 2 can be actually a very important number for people if one gets bounced out. It's an interesting way of going. But Andrew, I come from a background of 6 years in New York City government, basically in finance, economic development, and I did budgets for city agency.
Oh boy.
I was really happy to hear you talk about the budget deficit for 2023. That is huge. We have a lot of one-shots in this year's budget. So my question to you is, and please be specific, how are you going to address a $5 billion budget when we know you're so limited in what resources you have? So you're either going to have to raise property taxes, fine people more, or cut staff and negotiate with unions to get those reductions in pay. So of those options, which most appeals to you as a way of governance to show where you're headed?
I'm so glad that you are calling attention to this as well, because I think it's irresponsible what Bill de Blasio is doing with our budget. He's setting us up to fail. He's setting the city to fail. The next mayor is going to show up, and as you just said, a $5.3 billion deficit 2.5 years from now. So any common sense manager would look at the situation and say, we should be trying to smooth that out and reduce that deficit in 2023. And if you've been part of city government, you know that they're habitually asked to find cost efficiencies and savings. Hey, where you say, hey, try and find me 2 to 3% of savings per year, and you can do that without reducing headcount. But Bill de Blasio hasn't even done the basics. We've gone 7.5 years without agency heads even being asked to find cost savings and efficiencies. So you know the bloat is staggering. You know that as soon as you get there, you're going to find insane levels of waste and inefficiency everywhere from procurement to the fact that our payroll has grown by about 30,000 employees over the last number of years, even as organizations in other parts of the city have tightened their belts. So I'm so glad that you heard last night that we should be raising the alarm. Who the heck wants to inherit a $5.3 billion deficit 2.5 years from now? And I am blown away that other candidates on the stage are also not raising a stink about this, unless they either don't expect to be mayor, don't understand the numbers, or owe Bill de Blasio so much in the way of favors that they can't say an ill word about him.
Okay, but what are you going to do? What is your proposal? Because here's the thing. I know all about PEGs. They never go above 2-3%. We're looking at a closer to 6, potentially 7% deficit in the budget. How do you think the best way to meet that challenge is specifically? How do you get there? Efficiency.
Is it those cuts? So you're talking about cutting.
Well, that's 3%. That's 3%. How are you going to make up the rest? It only comes to headcount and
cut
taxes.
6%? Cut 7%?
It would be 3% if you have done it habitually over the last number of years. But at this point, you actually can find, I believe, more than 3% because Bill de Blasio, again, has just let the agencies just run amok. So you start there, and then if you do have to examine headcount and the way that the resources of the city are being spent, then you have to dig in. You know, that the reality is that we're going to have to do more with the resources we have. We can't just rely on business as usual. And so if you have to evaluate certain agencies and say, look, you have this many people doing this, like, can we make a different allocation? You're going to have to find the fat first. And there's a lot of fat in our government. And you want to try and avoid the muscle and the bone, but it's going to involve some difficult choices ahead.